Hi, my name is Jessica Anderson, and this is my final research presentation, Homes for Homeless Veterans. I find homelessness, specifically among veterans, to be one of the most important social issues our country faces today. My passion for this issue is driven by my personal connection to the military. My father and grandfather both served in the Army, and my little sister is currently in AIT training. So far, my family has been lucky enough to never experience homelessness, but I don't believe that any veteran should ever have to experience this. The National Coalition for the Homeless found that on any given night, 20% of the homeless population, which is over 130,000 individuals on the street, are veterans. There are currently several forms of housing available to homeless veterans, the most effective type being the Housing First approach. This approach would reduce the number of veterans on the streets and successfully help transition them back into society. Before we examine the different types of housing options available to veterans, it's important that we understand why they are homeless in the first place. One of the most significant risk factors for homelessness among veterans is mental health conditions. According to the National Coalition for the Homeless, studies have shown that 76% of veterans experience a mental health condition. Substance use disorder is one of the most substantial risk factors for homelessness in general and is very prevalent among veterans. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is also very common among veterans. PTSD causes negative changes in the way the person reacts to stimuli and is directly related to the traumatic experiences that individual faces. There are treatments available to help with these mental health issues through the VA. There are over 1,000 healthcare facilities that accept the VA healthcare, which include medical centers as well as inpatient and outpatient services. Adam J. McTighe wrote a useful source, Evidence-Based Practices, Ethical Considerations, and Advocacy Efforts to Reduce Mental Health Stigma in Veterans with Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, which discovered that only 23 to 40% of veterans that have been diagnosed with a mental health issue actually seek treatment. After I learned how few veterans are utilizing their government services, I had to figure out why. Corian B. Cox's study, Characteristics and Service Utilization of Homeless Veterans Entering VA Substance Use Treatment, revealed several issues veterans face when trying to use their benefits. One of the issues common for veterans is eligibility requirements. The veterans either don't know that there are requirements or they do not meet them all. Another issue veterans have is that it's a very complex system, so they have a really hard time navigating the system, and so they can't utilize their services if they can't figure out how to work it. Another major issue for homeless veterans is transportation. Very few homeless individuals have means of transportation or finances to buy bus fare or train tickets, anything like that, so if they can't travel to the specific facility that they need to, they cannot receive treatment. And then the final issue we see among veterans is the stigma that's associated to mental health issues. Oftentimes, veterans feel weak or that they have a personal defect when they're suffering from a mental health condition, and this contributes to their substance abuse. If we were to normalize treatment of mental health conditions, I believe it would reduce the stigma that's associated with them, increasing the number of veterans that do seek treatment, and then that would reduce the number of veterans that are on the streets every night. Now that we have some background information on why veterans become homeless and don't utilize their government services, we can examine the various housing options available to them. The first housing option we're going to look at is homeless shelters. The National Coalition for the Homeless has expressed that there is not enough beds for all of our homeless veterans. These shelters receive funding for approximately 8,000 beds when we know that there are over 130,000 homeless veterans on the street every night. These shelters are not specific for veterans, so any other individual that is on the streets can utilize these shelters, therefore eliminating more beds for veterans. With my experience with homeless shelters, the individuals arrive around dinner, and then they must be out of the shelter shortly after breakfast. They share bunks, so there's very little personal space, and it's very easy for diseases to spread among this facility. These homeless shelters do not offer any form of job training or counseling or treatment or anything like that, so it really doesn't help the veteran to transition back into normal life. It's just a roof over the head for the evening. The next housing option we're going to examine is transitional housing. These housing programs often receive government funding. They are also very high demand program and require the veteran to be housing ready among admission. According to Requiring Sobriety at Program Entry, Impact on Outcomes in Supported Transitional Housing for Homeless Veterans by John A. Shinka, housing ready means a veteran must be sober when they're being admitted. They must participate in treatment and services. They must meet with the case manager and set up a treatment plan, and then strictly comply with this treatment plan, or they will be asked to leave the program. So this housing option allows veterans to stay up to 2 years, and it will hopefully help them secure permanent residence by the time they complete this program. Housing Chronically Homeless Veterans, Evaluating the Efficacy of a Housing First Approach to HUD-VASH by Anne E. Montgomery states that there is a decrease in urgent care visits by about 18% and in inpatient mental health treatment by 98% in the veterans that are utilizing a typical transitional housing approach. There are various forms of transitional housing programs, the newest type being teeny house villages. Sierra Turner wrote a comparative essay, It Takes a Village, designating teeny house villages as transitional housing campgrounds, which states these villages are cost-effective, they are innovative, they are environmentally friendly, and then, like I mentioned, they're budget-friendly as well. However, they do face some issues when it comes to zoning, building, and housing codes. But we're lucky enough that here in Missouri, our codes when it comes to zoning and housing aren't super strict with teeny houses, and so the Veterans Community Project has established a teeny house village for veterans. This project opened in February and currently has 13 houses. The veterans live rent-free. However, they must engage in job training, drug rehabilitation, counseling, and any other services their case manager deems necessary. The Veterans Community Project has a very strict compliance policy, and if the veterans do not follow the rules, they will be evicted from the premises. This is a really awesome opportunity for veterans because it provides them with some privacy, as well as giving them a sense of independence and community, giving them the support that they need to stay sober and get through the treatment plan. The final housing approach we're going to examine, in my opinion, the most effective housing option for veterans is the Housing First approach. From the Anne E. Montgomery article that I mentioned earlier called Housing Chronically Homeless Veterans, Evaluating the Efficacy of a Housing First Approach to HUD-VASH, I was able to gather some information on this approach. The Housing First approach does not require individuals to be housing ready. They are able to work towards their sobriety while simultaneously searching for permanent housing immediately. They are also allowed to utilize community-based services for support. They can use mainstream services. They will receive help with accessing their VA benefits, and they're offered 24/7 case management. So they get a hold of a case manager anytime if they are needing to. This study also showed that the Housing First approach took about a month or 35 days to transition the veteran from the program facility to a permanent resident unit, while the traditional transitional program takes about 6 months to 223 days to transition them. It also looked at the housing retention between the Housing First approach and a traditional housing transitional program. The housing retention for the Housing First approach was 98% after 12 months, and for the usual treatment program, it was about 86%. So it was over 10% higher for the Housing First approach, showing that it is a more effective approach. We also saw a decrease in the urgent care visits by 66% in the Housing First approach, and inpatient mental health treatment reduced by 39% among this group. So we know that there are many different options available for homeless veterans when it comes to health care as well as housing. I know that there are various factors for why a veteran becomes homeless, though the most substantial risk factor is mental health issues. There are services offered to veterans to treat these conditions, though they do face many issues when trying to utilize their VA benefits. With the Housing First approach, veterans will receive help accessing their benefits and be exposed to treatment. When working towards their sobriety, they are simultaneously searching for permanent residence. With this Housing First approach, that is why it is the most effective housing option for transitioning veterans back into society. The Housing First approach is the housing option I would recommend to my relatives if they ever experience homelessness, though I hope they never do, and I hope that eventually no other veteran will have to experience it either. Thank you.